Imagine for a moment that your life is like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples move outward, touching everything in their path. Each word you speak, each act of kindness or neglect, each moment of courage or fear, all of it forms the legacy you leave behind. Legacy is not about grandeur or fame, it is about impact. About the unseen ways your life shapes others. And for those of us seeking to walk in faith, legacy becomes something deeply sacred, something tethered to eternity. In this quiet space, I invite you to consider what kind of legacy you are building. Not in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God. What story is your life telling? What echoes will your days leave in the hearts of those around you? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. And the beautiful thing is that Scripture, God's living Word, gives us a map. The Bible is filled with men and women whose lives speak volumes long after they have passed. Think of Abraham, who trusted God enough to leave his homeland and follow a promise. Or Ruth, whose loyalty and love transformed not just her life, but the lineage of King David and ultimately Jesus. Consider Paul, a man once consumed by hatred, transformed into a messenger of grace and truth. Their legacies were not the result of perfect lives, but of faithful ones. They listened to the voice of God and they acted. Legacy begins in the heart. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." What we treasure in our hearts shapes our actions, our attitudes, and ultimately, our impact. If we desire to build a legacy that honors God, we must start by examining the soil of our hearts. Are we nurturing love, kindness, humility, and faith? Or are we clinging to bitterness, pride, and fear? When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he responded with deep simplicity, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Matthew 22:37-39. These two commands contain the core of a life that leaves a meaningful legacy. If we live out love, genuine, selfless, God-honoring love, then our lives will naturally ripple outward to bless others. There's a quiet power in consistency. Often, we believe that building a legacy requires dramatic gestures or heroic feats. But God's kingdom grows in quiet faithfulness. A father who prays with his children each night, a mother who speaks life into her family, a friend who listens deeply, a stranger who offers a meal. These are seeds planted in love. And as Galatians 6-9 reminds us, let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. I think of a man named Jonathan. Not the Jonathan who fought beside King Saul's son David, though his story is inspiring too. This Jonathan was a teacher in a small village. He never had a platform, never wrote a book. But he lived his faith in quiet ways. Every morning he would rise early and pray for each of his students by name. He would ask God for wisdom to love them well. Some of those children came from broken homes, some from despair. But in Jonathan's classroom, they were seen, cherished, and guided. Years later, many of those children would say it was because of him they found hope. He didn't know the full reach of his faithfulness, but God did. And God still does. It's not about being seen. It's about being faithful. Hebrews 11, often called the Hall of Faith, tells us about people who lived by faith. Some conquered kingdoms. Some were persecuted and wandered in deserts. Yet, they are honored not because of their outward achievements, but because they lived with unwavering trust in God. That trust shaped their decisions, their values, and the legacy they left behind. One of the most moving stories of legacy in the Bible comes from a woman who is often overlooked. Her name was Tabitha, also known as Dorcas, in the book of Acts. She wasn't a prophet or a ruler. She was simply described as a disciple who was always doing good and helping the poor. When she died, the people who loved her wept and showed Peter all the garments she had made for them. Her acts of love had clothed the community. Her legacy was sown with thread and compassion. And God, through Peter, raised her back to life. Isn't that beautiful? Her story tells us that simple goodness, carried out with love, echoes into eternity. As you walk through life, ask yourself, who am I lifting up? Who am I encouraging? What are my words building? Do they build bridges or walls? Are my hands open in generosity or clenched in fear? Do I live like I believe that Christ is enough? Jesus spoke often of storing up treasures in heaven, not on earth. Matthew 6:19-21. A legacy built on material success fades, but one built on love, faith, and sacrifice, that is eternal. Think of the widow who gave her last coin in the temple. Jesus noticed her. Her story is still told today. Why? Because her heart was fully surrendered to God. To build a legacy of faith, we must live as if each moment matters. Because it does. The way you speak to your children, the patience you show to a stranger, the way you forgive even when it hurts. These are the brushstrokes of your legacy. And God sees them all. You don't need a stage. You don't need a title. You simply need a willing heart. A heart that says, "Here I am, Lord, use me." And he will. David, the shepherd boy turned king, was called a man after God's own heart. Not because he was perfect, he certainly wasn't, but because he turned back to God again and again. He sought God's heart. That's what matters. When we fail, and we all will, we don't hide, we return. We ask for mercy, and we begin again. Building a legacy means playing the long game. It means trusting that even when you don't see the fruit, the seeds you've planted are growing. In 1 Corinthians 15:58, Paul writes, "Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." And what of those days when you feel small? When your efforts seem unnoticed? Remember this: Jesus began his ministry not with a crowd, but with a few fishermen. He spoke of mustard seeds and yeast, tiny things that transformed everything. God delights in the small. He honors the hidden faithfulness of his people. I want to tell you a story about a woman named Mary, not the mother of Jesus, but another Mary who lived in a humble town. She would bake bread every Sunday and deliver it to the elderly in her neighborhood. No one told her to. She just did it every week for decades. And at her funeral, dozens of people stood up and said, "She reminded me that God sees me." That was her legacy. Dear friend, what will people say of you, not to flatter, but to remember? Will they say you loved well, that you forgave, that you pointed them to something greater? If you want to live an impactful life, start by kneeling in prayer. Ask God to shape your heart. Seek his wisdom more than the world's approval. Love without condition, serve without recognition. Speak truth with grace, and when you fall, and you will get back up. His mercy is new every morning. Your life matters. Your days are not accidents. God has entrusted you with gifts, with time, with influence. Use them well, and trust that he will multiply what you offer. As we close this time together, I want to leave you with this. You don't need to chase greatness. You only need to follow Jesus. He is the legacy worth living for, the one who gave his life so that we might live. Let your life be an echo of his love, his grace, his truth. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this message has stirred something in your heart, if it has reminded you of who you are and what you're here for, I invite you to stay connected. Please subscribe to the channel Echoes of the Bible. Let's continue this journey together, seeking wisdom, growing in faith, and building legacies that echo into eternity. God bless you, now and always.